Welcome to episode 7 of the G2 on 5G, the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We handled 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is my fellow analyst, partner in crime, Anshel And Will. So let's get started. My first topic is China Unicom, and it seems the Chinese operators are beating their chest again on counting numbers of base stations. So Unicom this week stated that they operate over 130,000 5G base stations nationwide, according to one report. And another states that China may end the year with over 600,000 5G base stations among all 3 of the major carriers in China. What's also interesting this week, news broke that China Unicom Americas is fighting what appears to be the restriction on foreign entity operation in the U.S. And as you recall, we've talked about this in the past. It's related to a new presidential order. So, Anshel, what do you think about all this?
Well, I think the counting of base stations is a bit weird. It seems like it's a metric that operators have found as a metric for success. But I think that base station counts, all they prove is that the operators have a great relationship with the government, or at least local government, and are able to, ramrod a bunch of cell sites in. But if those sites aren't properly backhauled and aren't designed for, the optimal 5G infrastructure layout, then it doesn't matter how many you have, right? Maybe you don't need 600,000 base stations by the end of the year, if there aren't enough customers for it, or if there just isn't the demand for it yet. It just like, in the US, I feel like operators maybe are a little behind because sometimes they develop their infrastructure based on demand, but this almost sounds like they're overbuilding infrastructure based on demand. But I have a feeling that a lot of it has to do with the government and incentivizing infrastructure build out.
I would agree with you. And, and China's focus has been in the low to mid band, not millimeter wave. And as we all know, you need densification of base stations for millimeter wave. So it makes more sense when you look at countries like the US that are very focused on millimeter wave. So I agree with you. I think, it's kind of providing big numbers out there in an attempt to demonstrate some leadership. From my perspective, it's also about the services. And, I've talked about SK Telecom in South Korea and how they've really led from a services perspective for consumer as well as enterprise. So time will tell how effective that is. But let's shift to your first topic this week. And you've been following Finland and some of the operators there. So why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, so Finland had an auction of spectrum, which have been happening, almost weekly now in different countries all around the world. Finland's unique because they're kind of like a mobile-first society. They were one of the first ones with HSPA. They had, were one of the first with LTE. They were also one of the first with 5G. They're doing 6G research already.
Right, I read about that.
So the interesting thing is that here they did a millimeter wave auction in the 25 to 27 gigahertz bands. And basically what happened is the 3 major operators in Finland all got 800 megahertz of spectrum. So it's like they're all equally getting the same amount of spectrum, which I think is a good thing for competition at least. And we'll see how that pans out. Overall, I believe the majority of Finland's population lives in like 3 cities, so I think they can make millimeter wave work. But at the same time, what's really crazy about Finland is I forget which band it is. It might be 400 megahertz, but they have like 3G coverage in the forests. So like you can have like a cabin in the middle of nowhere and have cell service. And I think Finland's like one of the few places in the world that can even say that they have that.
Yeah, and they've been very technically forward in general, and and I think having that coverage in rural also allows them to do some things with ag tech, right? And so that's sort of a growing trend in applying connectivity to do things like improve crop yields, and obviously there's forestry and timber and that sort of thing in that country. So
Yeah,
fishing as well. So
I think their tech first approach has really enabled them to be one of the most successful entrepreneurship economies in the world. Like they have an outlandishly high percentage of entrepreneurs and successful startups.
mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting. But what's also interesting is they're going to start deploying the spectrum starting July 1st. So,
Okay.
It's June. They auctioned it this week, and in a month they'll start deploying it. So, they've kind of been anticipating this. So it almost sounds like it's a little bit of a formality, but nonetheless, it's very interesting and egalitarian of them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things unfold there. Let's shift to my second topic this week, and let's talk about the Great White North, Canada. They announced that they postponed their 3.5 gigahertz spectrum auction due to COVID-19, and it looks like it's about a 6-month delay. And they stated that the focus is to allow the operators to deliver these essential services in the midst of the coronavirus. But is the coronavirus becoming a 5G scapegoat for operators? Rakuten recently announced a delay based on COVID-19. I'd love to get your thoughts there.
So I feel like COVID is being used as an excuse for a lot of things that aren't justified. There's like a lot of structural issues that already existed prior to COVID, and maybe COVID exacerbated them, but those were trends that were already happening. And I think that if anything, COVID has shown that 5G needs to grow out faster because it'll help alleviate some of the stresses on the networks that already exist.
Yeah.
So and I say you can see some countries are already and some operators are recognizing that and are accelerating 5G instead of slowing it down. So I'm not really sold on the idea that COVID-19, delaying 3.5 gigahertz spectrum auction will somehow, help operators deal with COVID-19. I understand that there are people, working in these companies that are dealing with, more demand, higher, needs from their customers and, having to deliver more services. But at the same time, I just don't see why COVID would prevent the people who are needed that to deploy the spectrum, because I feel like the operation and rollout of the spectrum doesn't really interfere that much with the daily operations of a network.
Right.
So I feel like I don't know, it just doesn't sound right to me.
I agree. And time will tell, obviously. But and I think if anything, there's an incentive, to your point, to accelerate the deployment, because then you can do pretty interesting things with contact tracing applications and that sort of thing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But let's shift gears. Let's hit your second topic. We've talked about this as well on other podcasts about 5G misinformation and links to the coronavirus and that sort of thing. Twitter stated that they're going to start fact checking, and you've been following this, so why don't you kind of elaborate on what they're doing?
Yeah, so what they've decided is that they're no longer going to allow misinformation about the link between 5G and COVID-19 to continue to spread on their platform. They're going to start fact checking people when they start posting things that connect COVID-19 to 5G, because we've already talked about, like you said, that there are some people who believe that 5G is causing COVID-19, which is demonstrably false. But on social media platforms, misinformation spreads incredibly quickly, and Twitter, I assume, sees this as a global problem, not just a U.S. problem, and as a result, have taken to fact-checking 5G misinformation tweets, and a lot of them are bots, which I think is an entirely different problem that Twitter needs to deal with, because I think bots on social media in general are a big problem, especially on Twitter, and they spread misinformation by convincing people that something's an issue when it's not. But yeah, it's not really a very significant issue. but it does connect to 5G in the sense that, people are blaming 5G for something that it literally cannot do.
Yeah, yeah, and you make a very good point. This is global, right? So we've heard misinformation, in the UK, and we've heard crazy stories about how people are trying to tear down what they think are 5G, radio towers and that sort of thing. So it's not just specifically oriented to one part of the world. So I think that this is a great thing. There's lots of fake news out there, right? And this is certainly one of the biggest in my mind. So. Let's shift to my third topic this week, and it's around Nokia. And they recently conducted some research. It was actually surveys of people in the United States, the United Kingdom, and also South Korea. And one of their big conclusions, which I find sort of like Captain Obvious, is that they find that fixed wireless access services are a big opportunity, not only for consumers. That makes a lot of sense, right? Broadband to the home, and when you're underserved by fiber, but also for SMBs. And so I'm not surprised by this. Obviously, Nokia is very heavily focused on fixed wireless access and the gear and the infrastructure that's associated with that. What are your thoughts here? I mean, obviously, to you and I, it's pretty obvious. Is this just sort of a marketing ploy on Nokia's part, or what?
I think it kind of is. It sounds like hey, fixed wireless is important. Phones are cool and all, but fixed wireless is an opportunity for growth. Mm-hmm. And I think they're just reminding operators to remember that that's an opportunity as well. Mm-hmm. Because I think there's so many different applications of 5G, and I think fixed wireless is a huge one because no one wants to pay to dig those last couple hundred feet. Yeah. And those last couple hundred feet are the most costly because they don't scale. Yeah. And I think fixed wireless is a total no-brainer. It's just we have to have the coverage in the backhaul. And that's kind of funny because it kind of leads into my next topic.
Right. Yeah. That's talking about the FCC and some developments there, right?
Yeah, because the FCC, had a meeting recently this week. I think a couple of days ago, actually now. And they did two things. They kind of modified their 2014 language around site or citing. And basically what they're doing is enabling operators to quickly get the shot clock running so that municipalities have to respond to their requests for deploying sites, and that they have to do, they have to have a written statement, but also that they can more easily upgrade existing sites, so they don't have to, file paperwork or as much paperwork, hopefully, to upgrade current sites to 5G. And then the other thing that they did is that they also explored the use of 70, 80, and 90 gigahertz spectrum, which would be used for 5G, but it would be used for 5G backhaul, which means it would be basically a way to interconnect the network with itself, or to the actual backhaul, fiber backhaul, and basically reduce the cost of deploying a network, so that potential some cell sites may never actually have any fiber going to them because they're actually getting 70, 80, 90 gigahertz signal, which is actually the backhaul that serves them, so that they can rebroadcast as a 5G signal.
I think it's super positive. I've been critical of the FCC and the auction process and the how these auctions spiral at times out of control from a cost perspective. If you follow the FCC on Twitter, they're often bragging, hey, we completed this auction and we put another $8 billion in the federal coffers, and that's all great, but there's got to be a balance, because if there's not, then operators are going to be challenged because they're spending billions of dollars to deploy this 5G infrastructure to do just that and deploy services and all of that. So I think this is positive news. I think you would agree, right?
Yeah, I think it's positive news. I think there's definitely some people that are concerned about, how municipalities can deal with it. But I also think there's a lot of municipalities out there that genuinely are so misinformed that they're just banning 5G because they don't even understand what it means.
Exactly.
So it's like, do I trust a city that doesn't understand what 5G is and is banning it for health concerns?
Right.
I don't really. There's a balance somewhere in there, and I hope we can find it. But I do think that increasing permitting rights and making it easier for operators to roll is extremely important for the U.S. to be competitive, because we're a large country with a lot of people, and our government doesn't rule like other governments do in terms of mandating siting. So I think it's a positive thing, and we just have to be careful and make sure that it's not too onerous on the cities and it's not too restrictive on operators. And there will be a balance somewhere in between, and hopefully we're close to it right now.
No, I agree with that. Well, hey, my friend, another great session this week. Why don't you take us home?
All right. So we hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone would like to hear about any specific topics or have us provide any insight on them related to 5G, please feel free to reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech on Twitter, and I'm at Anshel. We hope that you have a great weekend, and please tune again next time.